I'm Lisa Wolf-Chason, and this is my final presentation. For my capstone project, I'd like to use the case study method to examine two public schools that experienced active shooter casualties and tragedies. The two schools I'll be focusing on are Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut, and Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. I'd like to see what factors enhance or deter their ability to achieve and utilize a discourse of renewal. And it's of particular interest to me because I served as part of a crisis management team member for a large public school district in Florida when both of these tragedies took place. And although my district was not directly impacted, it certainly changed the national conversation about safety in schools and changed the way that we prepare for large-scale crises in the school setting. My literature review focuses on 4 topics: crisis communication as a discipline and the foundations of it, how social media kind of changed the response strategies, the pre-crisis reputation and how that can aid an organization in returning to a sense of normalcy, and ultimately a goal of achieving a discourse of renewal. So the field of crisis communication was really established out of the field of apologia and a need to really apologize for wrongdoings, as well as attribution theory, which suggests that people seek out a reason or seek out someone to blame following a crisis. There are 2 schools of thought. Coombs thought that really organizations should be using empirical data to guide their response strategy process. So he proposed the situational crisis communication theory, which suggested that you could pick an appropriate response based on your crisis responsibility and reputational threat. So depending on the event, it might be more advised to use a defense tactic or an apology tactic. The other school of thought was more qualitative in nature and used case studies to review organizations who had gone through a crisis to tease out some best practices. And that can include examples like partnering with outside organizations, being available to the media, and tailoring your messages to meet your specific stakeholders. Regardless of the school of thought that you prescribe to, the advent and use and growth of popularity of social media changed crisis response strategies. Basically, now it had to be incorporated into organizations, and many organizations were lagging behind. School districts were no exception. Thompson et al. And Mazur et al. Both specifically studied school districts' use of social media during crisis and found that they are unique because they have highly engaged stakeholders. Also typical of school organizations there's a lack of a person who can be dedicated to monitor and respond to social media chatter, and there were no set guidelines for students and staff ahead of the crisis. So as the crisis was occurring, students and staff didn't know what their expectation was for online communications. An additional challenge was the speed of information. Social media allows people to post instantaneously without any credible information. So you can have a bystander who doesn't have a connection to the crisis posting more quickly than the organization could officially respond. Most organizations respond between 5 minutes and an hour, which is relatively quick, but social media is instantaneous. So these messages can sometimes be at odds with one another. Pre-crisis reputation is another important factor. Coombs and Holliday discovered the halo effect, which they suggest acts as a shield for an organization in crisis if they had a good prior crisis reputation. And the idea is that you can work to establish goodwill in the community you serve before a crisis happens, so that when the crisis occurs, you have a goodwill in the bank, stored in the bank, to kind of shield you from the negative impact. It's also important to maintain good relationships with outside partners so they can be your advocates. All of this ultimately would lead to your ability or disability to use the discourse of renewal. Discourses of renewal are focused on being transformative, being very forward-looking, and focuses on healing. And it's much easier to use a discourse of renewal if you have a good pre-crisis reputation. It can be challenging for public school systems because of legal concerns and lawsuits. The government oversight restricts a school organization's ability to be transformative, and it can be difficult to return to normal operations when you have students and staff who are traumatized. I will be looking at a qualitative case study method in order to review state and federal commission reports as well as news reports. And ideally, I'd like to do semi-structured interviews with members of both schools' crisis management teams, as well as founders of Sandy Hook Promise, which consist of parents who achieved renewal. And I'll be using open and axial coding to tease out themes, and I look forward to working with my mentor next semester.